Awesome. Thanks, Ella. So I'm really excited about this being in the, let's say, coming out of lockdown, seeing what we've seen over the past 12, 15, 18 months, or it feels like a lot longer. But the market's definitely shifting. So I'm really excited today to be joined by a couple of people that are, let's say, closer to the data of what's going on than most people in the industry. So do you guys want to introduce yourself before we give a bit more background of what we're going to cover? Oliver first.
Totally, yeah. So, hey guys, I'm Oliver Marczinsky. I'm with Pricelabs. I've been with the company for about 3 years at this point, so very familiar with the pricing side of things. And my role in the company is a lot of our enterprise sales for North America. So talking to a lot of the larger property managers, a lot of the small property owners, bringing them onto the platform and helping them kind of optimize their rates based off of what's happening on the market. So at this point, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of different portfolios in different markets, constantly checking in on those. So hopefully can bring that U.S. perspective here a little bit. And then most recently shifting towards a marketing role here at the company. So
Thanks, Oliver. And Jess?
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Jesse Lott. I'm general manager of Beyond we call it EMEA, but really we're focused on Europe and the UK and Ireland. And so if you aren't familiar with Beyond, we're a revenue management platform. We offer pricing, channel management, websites across the board. But really our roots are in data. And so when this topic came up and we had the opportunity to discuss today, it's like, gosh, this is exactly what I love talking about, exactly what we talk about all day. So one, thank you for having me. And two, I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Brilliant. And I'll be chipping in with a few perspectives as well. So I run a management company in the UK with about 100 properties and also have a accommodation agency which specializes in basically contractors or businesses. So we're facing some unique challenges whilst the staycation and leather market's booming. One of my core client bases is really struggling because rates have gone through the roof. So I'll give a different perspective probably to you guys as well. So I think it'll be a really great discussion. So just to kick things off, a couple of housekeeping rules now we've had a few others join. If you can mute yourself, that would be great. There is a separate channel which you can find down the left-hand side, hashtag mastermind. You'll be able to drop questions in there. We'll be picking them up as we go throughout the session. So yeah, that's the only housekeeping, but by all means, ask as much questions, get as much value as you can, because we've got some great minds that we're going to spend the next hour with. So to kick things off, over the past couple of weeks, we've seen definitely a shift. I know I felt it firsthand around just a change in market, people starting to book ahead, plan ahead, demand ramping up. From your perspective, Oliver, what have you seen changing over the last couple of weeks, and where do you think we are in terms of how the next couple of months are going to play out? Is it like it's all hit yet, or is more of it still coming? That'd be a great way to kick off.
Definitely. So what I'm seeing in the US is it's starting to hit here, but I think a lot of it's still coming. So about a month ago, lots of our users were worried. They were looking out into, the end of August, early September, October. They were saying, hey, we're absolutely empty for now. So really the trend looked like everyone had really booked far in advance for the summer. Tons of bookings coming in. Most of the vacation destinations that we're managing here, they're seeing 95, 100% occupancy across the board. But really that shoulder season was slow to pick up here. So in the last week or two, we've definitely started seeing that shoulder season start creeping up with a lot of the longer bookings here. So my inclination is kind of to think that it's the people who can still work from home. They're starting to think about, hey, we had our summer trips, or maybe we didn't have our summer trips. Now that things are cooling off a little bit, prices aren't as crazy as they have been in a lot of those destinations. Can we get some of that week-long travel in where they might still be, working remotely, but they'll take their family out to, explore a new city or some of the national parks as they're in kind of that fringe season there. So we're starting to see an uptick in that shoulder season coming up. But for the most part, most markets are still hovering around 20% or so occupancy after the summer here. So I think that'll get a lot stronger in the coming months. I think, towards the end of the summer is really when we'll see that that shoulder season really start to take off here.
Great stuff. And are you seeing consistent things, Jess?
Yeah, I think it varies by market from what we've been seeing. And so I'd probably split the world into two right now. So the U.S. is, and I'm sure that you all saw this as well, Oliver, right? Like a phenomenal summer in the U.S. Above expectations. It was just incredible. But as we know, like seasonality has changed, and there's a couple elements of that, I think. One is, and I'm just talking about the U.S., like the curve has changed, and so we saw it a little bit in 2020. We saw a lot of it in 2020. We're seeing it really extend out now, where you have that demand or the occupancy extend out into later fall, and it's like revenue is just pouring in for a lot of managers. I don't think that the uptick that we've seen has been more recent. It's probably happened over the last couple months where shoulder season has been filling in a little bit more and more. In Europe, I think, and I'm not sure where I should focus. I'm happy to talk about either market. They're both really interesting, but I'll give kind of an overview of Europe as well. The UK cottage market has been just going incredibly well. Like the more rural markets in the UK, revenue is going incredibly well. Where we've seen the biggest change in, call it UK and not as much are in the more urban markets. So folks are beginning to come back into their urban stays, coming into cities and scheduling those visits. But I think the largest story right now that we're seeing is in Southern Europe. So I live in Barcelona, and the Brits are here. You're seeing more and more roller bags and people hopping out of the subways. It's like traditional European vacations are starting to come. And in a similar fashion to what we saw in the U.S., shoulder season is extending. I was having a conversation with Aaron, who's our revenue manager, is based in Barcelona, and he oversees just Europe, a few weeks ago. And I remember talking to him like, hey, expect a longer shoulder season. And he was like, no, we're not seeing it now. We're not seeing the data. But over the last couple of weeks in Southern Europe, we've started to see that seasonality change and sort of the shoulder season come up with occupancy and more people booking vacations a little bit further out in the year than you would traditionally see in Europe, which is just exceptional given what this industry has gone through and what we've all felt over the last 18 months. And it's hard to believe it's been 18 months.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with what I felt here. Talking purely about the UK market, where things have been steady over the past couple of months. It actually probably saw a stronger May than June, to be honest, with I think people quickly rebounded when any restrictions were lifted, and then it slowed down a bit in June. And then we're just seeing a consistent ramp up. But I don't think, well, I know we haven't hit the UK summer, so talking about like a phenomenal summer in the US, we've got our hottest day of the year today, and like I would say almost everywhere we're dealing with is 100% occupancy. The other trend we're seeing over anywhere that's remotely touristy or leisurey is shorter stays. So traditionally in the summer, people would be going for a week, 7 days, 10 days. We're seeing people doing 2 nights, 3 nights, 4 nights because the rates are so high, that a 3-night stay in somewhere that's, I would say, an average tourist destination is probably the same as what a week in Spain would have been like 2 years ago. So I think people are just desperate for anything that they're like compressing their stays, and because of that, it's like widow nights in the middle of the weeks, like a random Tuesday and Wednesday are being booked in the middle of August, whereas before it would be, well, you'd be lucky to get anything. And yeah, that's just seeing the prices, and that'd probably be a great next question. Like, what are the nightly rates you're seeing? Because I'm feeling like they're at least 200%, maybe 300% on the weekends. And then in the weeks, it really depends on the locations. And some of the people I talk to, operators, they're they're probably 500 or 600% what they would normally get on the weekends. So what are you seeing across the board? Probably go Jesse first. What are you seeing across the board in terms of like nightly rates, and how's that being impacted?
Sure. So we'll paint with as broad a brush as possible. I think the most interesting that's happening right now is we've broken out of what we've always seen in the market. And what I mean by that is usually you can use price, you can raise price to kind of drop occupancy, or you can expect occupancy to drop, or you can drop price and then occupancy will increase. There's kind of a supply and demand that meets somewhere, and that's kind of like equilibrium, or you can assume that it's equilibrium, assuming everything else goes well. But what we've seen in a lot of markets, especially in the recovery, is everyone's looking to get out of the house, is a movement in that people have raised prices an incredible amount, and occupancy, which you could read as demand, hasn't wavered at all. And so we've had managers that have done exactly what you're saying, that 2-3 X on last year's prices, or excuse me, 2019 prices, and just increased and increased and increased. I think it tends to be more, I always say when I'm talking to a manager is like, optimize for your business and what your outcomes, what you want your outcomes to be. There's a lot of UK clients, for example, that really don't want to raise rates too much. They want to protect their reviews and so on and so forth, which probably isn't the right way to do it, especially in a market like this. But I would say that those that are willing to push price and those that are willing to price at market, 2 to 3X in a great market. If you're looking at more urban, then it's probably a more reserved increase. And this is UK. In the US, I think it's like probably more. Oliver, you probably have a pretty similar opinion, but sorry, I don't want to lead the witness. Go ahead.
No, definitely. I mean, very similar opinion where we've started seeing people utilize maximum prices quite a bit more, just saying, hey, I want to price a little bit more compassionately. I don't want to, basically be scalping all of my guests here, and just actually setting those reasonable prices. So even if they know they can get, let's say, 3-4X of what they did last year, we're seeing a lot of property managers hold back from doing that and just saying, hey, I think that's a ridiculous amount to pay for a vacation. I would never want to pay that much, so let's not charge that much. So definitely not the revenue optimizing way to go about it. But people saying, hey, regardless of what I can get, this is what I'm comfortable charging, and kind of leaving their rates capped off there. So big thing really has been trusting that the demand will be there and leaving your rates set high. So let's say approaching the summer season or the shoulder season, if we're not seeing demand in the shoulder season yet, really looking back to 2020 and saying, hey, you guys were still full all of September, all of October. We expect those trends to be there, so don't worry about dropping your rates now just because you aren't booked. That demand is most likely to leave them high a little bit longer. See if those pick up, and then you'll likely still get that occupancy. So, I mean, we've been seeing very similar things where there's just a shortage of short-term rentals in most markets. More people are traveling than there are, accommodation available. So, honestly, a great time to get more properties, ramp that up, and anywhere that you do have occupancy available, it's getting eaten up super quickly here, regardless of the price.
Yeah, and are you seeing anything with the durations, or I know like larger properties, and Jesse, you alluded to this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like you say, the cottages that are typically 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, and it's like family get together, and with like durations of stay or size of houses. Is there like anything else that's really jumping out at you?
I would say length of stay has decreased markedly because we don't see as many kind of work from home set, and I think the prices are a little bit high to book out for a month at a time or whatever it might be. I would say that I don't have enough data on the very, very large properties and understanding kind of what the villas are doing or what the large cottages are doing. Service a lot of those, but I don't think that I have a great estimate on that. But I'd say by and large, it's shorter stays. Yeah, I don't know, Oliver, you might have more context than I do on large properties, but.
Totally. Large properties, by and large, shorter stays, wherever we saw the traditional vacation destinations, especially on the East Coast where people are used to the Saturday to Saturday stays. those are still mostly coming in, and a lot of property managers are still setting their restrictions as such to require that week-long stay there. But then with the shorter, smaller properties, I've definitely started seeing a small decrease in length of stay. So one interesting trend I've noticed is for the suburban markets, so everything on kind of the outskirts of big cities. I've noticed that if you do set that higher length of stay requirement, so let's say you require only week-long bookings and your price is pretty reasonable where you're not, gouging the weekends and, having that final cost for that week-long stay be set too high. We've been, or at least anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people who are currently home shopping, looking for a place to stay. So they might be moving into the city. They're waiting for their house to close, or they're looking for a new house to buy. And I've heard lots of customers saying that's kind of been a huge segment of that urban market going on this summer as housing gets a little crazy here in the U.S.
That's interesting. So I maybe it's not my place to ask questions, but I'm interested. Oliver, have you seen customers actually increasing minimum stays for the Suburbans?
We have. So that's something I recommend quite a bit. I'm looking at how far out people are booking certain lengths of stay. So in the Suburbans, last minute travel, so let's say people booking within the last 2 or 3 weeks or so, we're still seeing a lot of those 3 and 4 night stays coming in. But everything that's, let's say, more than 3 weeks out, there is enough demand for those week-long stays, 2-week-long stays, etc. Where I'll very often recommend just saying, hey, let's set that 7-night minimum for anyone who's booking a little bit further in advance here. Look for those longer stays, and maybe in the last week or two, slice that down to a 3-4 night minimum. So depending on the market, everything's always a little bit different, but we have been seeing a lot of those kind of week-long stays still coming in here.
Interesting. Yeah, we typically see as folks come on the platform, especially in traditional markets, start with a longer stay, and then as they get more and more comfortable with dynamic pricing or they extend their day more, to take out any sort of barriers to book. And as long as you're pricing each day correctly and you have day a week or seasonality, as you know, you tend to, or at least my experience is you tend to see those come off rather than go back on, which is interesting. It's a weird phenomenon going on with the real estate market. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah, so the reason I push those kind of more requirements for your bookings is usually to limit those gaps. So you might be in a market that's super weekend heavy. If someone goes in a month in advance, books your Friday, Saturday, then you're stuck with like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that you have to fill all of a sudden. So on our end, trying to say, hey, if we can get people to stay the entire week, those tend to get filled a little bit better, and then you're not just stuck with those weekday rates. So, of course, every market's a little bit different, but for those where it might be someone saying, hey, let's spend a weekend in the city, let's get something on the outskirts so it's a little bit cheaper, filling those weekdays has been a little bit struggle to get longer.
Great, that's really, really good advice, Oliver. And I think we're seeing that in the UK a lot. Just by nature of where some of the locations, the UK is an interesting market, how it's split. You've got the real leisure touristy places that are very, very seasonal. You've got the urban inner city places, which yes, have some seasonality, but are also quite industrial and have good all year round from like workers. And then you've got the spread in the middle where it's like you say, it's on suburban places, and it's sort of a mix between both the people working to a budget, be it travel to visit families, weddings, get-togethers, but also groups of workers. And we're seeing something similar around that, where it's shorter stays are booked last minute, longer stays are booked far out, and it is getting skewed by weekend pricing. And that's sort of where some of my questions were. Well, when you look at dynamic pricing and like the Pricelabs, and you look at some of the places that it's suggested weekends, someone can set a day, all of us on the weekend just bumps the whole week because it's almost like cost of 5 or 4 before. So how do I manage across different markets? How are you using people and guiding around? Because I think that's very real in the UK, that you either set a strategy and say, let's price high for the weekends and maximize that, and then let's go for, let's say, typically works people with lower per night budgets to get Monday to Friday full, and then sort of make that, or you set a middle pricing and say, I'm going to go for 7 nights a week. So how are you advising people around like those sort of characteristics in the market?
Yeah, so on our end, a lot of that is showing the data for what is, let's say, the average book price of a week-long stay versus a nightly stay there. So if you're looking at, hey, for the upcoming month, nightly you can get quite a bit more, but for the week-long stays that are actually getting booked, making sure you're still competitive there. So there, it's just using those weekly discounts, so you still have that nightly price getting optimized there. But if someone does book the full week, making sure that price is still competitive for, what the competition is doing in that case.
Right. No, that's really helpful. So just to jump back to give a bit of context, I'd like to talk a bit about where we think the market's going to go, let's say over autumn, winter, and maybe into next year. Like how much of this is going to be lasting with people's pricing expectations into next year for hosts and guests. But before we do, let's look back a couple of years ago at 2019. So how many similarities in the market are we seeing, or is it we're just in an era in the market that we've never seen before with nothing to compare it against?
Sure. I think it's tough because there's so many different markets and they're all behaving differently. We have seen a lot of the markets, so you can almost follow where the vaccine is rolling out and where measures are rolling off and kind of follow the booking season. So 2019 in a lot of cases is our benchmark. We visualized 2 years ago, you can see it. And so I think just as a rule of thumb, as I'm looking at the tool a lot of times, I'll use 2019 as a benchmark. And there are a lot of markets, the US is definitely far above 2019. There's markets in Europe that are definitely far above it. So is the market fundamentally different? I don't think so. I think it's just a bounce back. And then we didn't have the first half of the year. I was speaking with a customer on a roundtable the other day, and he made a great point. It's look, he's UK based. He was saying look, I am expecting to do full year's worth of revenue in 7 months. It's okay. A lot of challenges with that on the operations side and everything else. And so from the operator's perspective, this is a different year. We're going to do a lot more revenue in the second half of the year than probably we were used to in 2019, in my opinion. And so with that, we have an abnormal kind of demand curve as markets come off. Demand curve being how many guests can we expect in the second half of the year? So it'll be abnormal. Next year, we're actually seeing strong bookings, especially across markets that people want to go to, and they tend to have a little bit longer lead time. Scotland is an example. They're doing incredibly well for 2022. And we're starting to see a more normal pattern. And if that revenue is spread out across the entire year, then the assumption is that it will be more normal. And I think where it gets more interesting are the markets where you can see folks that might be more likely to move away from traditional hotels and other accommodation sources. And I think that would be the structural shift. With that said, that's a lot of stuff, but I think it'll probably be a more similar year to 2019 next year than it was this year.
Right.
Yeah, definitely on the same page with that one. I think next year especially, we're forecasting to see a lot more of the urban travel returning. So as people, start traveling for business a little more, we get more of those events just scheduled, less uncertainty around those. As Jesse was saying, a lot of markets are already well above where 2019 was. We're really seeing the lagger there being just the big urban cities in the U.S., which aren't quite back to where they were, but hopefully into 2020, 2023 for sure. We're hoping those are back to where they were.
So on that, just to jump back to something, Jesse, you mentioned around things returning in 2022 looking more like 2019. Where's it going to be different on that? So is it going to be people looking and I don't know, I'm thinking of people I know personally where it's like they always used to travel and they say, actually, do you know what? They used to go for a big family, all-inclusive holiday. They've gone to a holiday cottage this year and they're like, actually, do you know what? I like that because people could come and visit that wouldn't used to go on holiday with us. So do you see like types of properties that will be different historically because of what's gone on this year? People may want to be less in urban cities because, I don't know, they've realised they like peace and quiet a bit more and don't want to be around as many people because of risk. So what parts of the market do you think will like maybe be slower than a couple of years ago, and which ones may have shifted positively for the long term?
Oh, interesting. This is very interesting. Crystal ball. And so I guess that I would have to say that this is kind of my opinion before.
We won't focus in a few years. Crystal ball, we won't hold you to it.
Okay, good. I would say if this year if 2021 was the year of experience in the cottage market and maybe the Smoky Mountains in the U.S., I would expect next year to have more urban demand. There have been a lot of young people leaving the city that have bought homes and have moved out of major centers. I would expect more urban demand to return to the market. London is still a phenomenal city. Chicago is a great place to visit. New York, Tokyo, all these places that have seen demand just totally drop off. Barcelona, they're still great places to visit, and a lot of folks have moved out of cities and have vacationed in the cottage market or wherever this year. And so if I were to, I'm not going to, so I'm neutral, but if I were to buy a property, it'd probably be in an urban center in one of the great cities that have been emptied out.
Oh, I think Jesse's frozen.
Oh no, did I freeze?
You froze on the punchline.
Oh no, I just said that I would buy a place in an urban city. Sorry, the punchline was ruined.
Oliver, what's your perspective on it? Is it the same?
Honestly, haven't thought about Jesse's perspective much, but it definitely makes a ton of sense. I mean, I'm one of those young people who left the city, bought a house in a small cowboy town here a couple hours out of Seattle, and now we're definitely seeing the city's like huge resurgence with a lot of my friends moving back there, rents going back to kind of 2019 levels for the long term. And then lots of people talking about, hey, let's go to New York, let's go to Chicago, let's get some of that big city life. So I think this year, national parks, all the beach destinations, definitely very overwhelmed. I could see people trying to mix it up next year a little bit and say, hey, let's get more of that urban hustle bustle now that we're back at things. So yeah, I think these strong vacation destinations, I think they'll continue to be strong, but I do think urban is going to recover very, very, very well into 2022 here.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective because I was looking at it as people that may go on a couple of holidays abroad now. So actually, do you know what? I go on one abroad and I go on one in like the UK, or if you're in the US, you go on another one in the US. Because in the UK, it's not traditionally like something you do. You either holiday abroad or you holiday in the UK. You don't really tend to do both. Whereas I think that could be the shift. And you're right. If people this year are so, let's say, in rural areas and out with nature, then they're going to want something that's completely the opposite next year because humans like variety and they like change and experience different things, especially people that like to travel typically. So moving that on then, what are like the main factors people should be thinking around now with their pricing and with booking lead times and really how to maximize like the next couple of months and also going into winter? What should be the key things they're looking at for pricing, for restrictions, for promotions, just to maximize like occupancy and revenue? Oliver, do you want that one?
I can start with that one. So I would say a big part of it, looking at your 2020 trends a little bit. So as we were saying earlier, I mean, we haven't seen the full pickup of that shoulder season yet, but really being confident in what happened last year. I don't think things are too different this year, so I think we can expect pretty similar things to happen. So all of your far out pricing, if we're looking into, let's say, next summer or the holidays, really making sure that you're ready for any sort of boom that might happen there. So we typically recommend longer minimum stays for those further out dates to capture any of those long bookings that still might be kind of in the works here. Otherwise, if you're someone who likes to have those shorter stay restrictions, just increasing your far out prices here. So making sure that, hey, you're priced competitively so that we do see that boom coming in. Making sure that you're not one of the properties that ends up getting booked first, and then you end up underselling when there does end up being, ultimately a good deal of demand there. Another thing, we've definitely been seeing more events get scheduled everywhere around the U.S. So for all of 2020, event pricing wasn't very much of a deal. I'm really getting back on top of that. So looking at, hey, where is demand spiking? Looking at events in your area, really keeping a good pulse on that and saying, hey, these event dates, don't treat them as any other day in your calendar. These are significantly different. So either charge a little bit more for those or know that a different clientele is committed for those. Yeah, that's kind of what I would definitely start with there.
Great stuff. And Jesse, from your perspective, how should people maximize like the next couple of months over the tail end of the summer and then going into autumn and fall, as you would say in the US?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the fall. Yeah, I do appreciate that. Yeah, I think largely in line, although it's just stylistic, but I tend not to recommend longer minimum stays, but that's a stylistic thing and kind of a strategy thing. But I would say, and a lot of the conversations that I'm having lately are around pricing to the market and not off of your gut. And so, there's a lot of data out there. There are a lot of data providers that can give you an idea of like where market pricing actually is, especially as the shoulder season gets pushed out. So look, this has been probably the hardest 18 months that anybody will ever have to go through. If you're still here after this 18 months, it is a testament to who you are as an operator, as an owner, and everything else. So, you have to protect your business and you have to price to the market. And so I would say, look at shoulder season. There's most likely an opportunity to maximize prices by potentially increasing. If you do have gaps, then you can potentially reduce minimum stays. We tend to see that quite often. And then a lot of people who have been locked up, especially in Europe, that have been in markets that aren't open and they haven't been able to travel, expect them to get out and travel. And so keep that in the back of your mind. If there are a lot of countries that haven't been able to come to the south of France or the south of Spain or to the UK and visit family, whatever it might be, there's demand. And they're all sitting at home and they're waiting for their markets to open and they're ready to go there as soon as quarantines are letting up or whatever it might be. So keep that in the back of your mind. I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity for a lot of folks who have gone through a very difficult time, and take advantage and be resourceful and make sure like you're maximizing your prices and taking advantage of that shoulder season that will surely be here.
Great stuff. Sorry, Oliver, if you've got another point to go.
Sorry, one quick comment on, pricing to the market. We've seen a lot of trends in a lot of markets where amenities are totally shifting booking trends. So when you're looking at your property, really looking at similar things. So, beachfront, always a big one. That one's pretty obvious. But one that really came out in 2020 was pet friendly, where in a lot of markets, we would just see totally different trends for properties that were listed at pet friendly, where that side of the market would maybe have 20, 30, 40% more occupancy than the other half of the market there. So if there are any of those trends that your properties really are optimized for, longer stays, pet friendly, if it's a great place to work, if no one else in the area has parking, really seeing, hey, what do similar properties do when you're setting those rates based off where the market's at there.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've got a few pet-friendly properties and they're definitely like booked further in advance with people planning because there is less available in the market. So just the flip side of like how to maximize revenue going forwards, probably more controversial. How should cancellation policies be managed? Because I know a lot of hosts had challenges over the past 18 months with how cancellation policies were enforced with lockdowns and things through OTA. So how should people be playing their cancellation policies now to like protect their business, but equally be fair to the guests and consumers. Jesse, do you want that one?
Sure. Yes, I do. Thank you. But yeah, it's complicated. I think with pretty much every relationship I've ever been in, as well as this question. So March of 2020, it taught us a lot, and it taught us a lot about the OTAs and how they are positioned towards managers and their view towards like how do we trade off between guests and owners or managers or whatever it might be. Learned something very, very valuable during that time, and I think it's pulled through. And that is that when you're looking at the OTAs, they will lean towards the consumer side of the business. They will lean towards guests. But guests will also kind of pull on that, and so that creates that demand pool that the OTAs have. So like it or not, that was probably a smart move for the OTAs to do that, because we will go towards where the guests are, and those are OTAs, and those are pools of demand, and those are millions of guests that we can potentially get. So you have kind of like your channel strategy on where you want to sell through, like the OTAs or your direct booking website, and how you want to structure that, premiums and everything else. And so I think the name of the game of a lot of managers that we've been talking to have been pulling them towards the direct booking side of it. And how do we actually control the customer experience the second they log on, to when they book, to when they check in, to when they check out, all of that. But there are benefits for the guests to use those OTAs, and those are those cancellation policies, the ease of use. It's like, I know Airbnb and everything else. And so in order to pull the demand, pull the guests over to your website, then I would argue for a less restrictive cancellation policy. It's not as protective towards your business, but ultimately we're trying to pull away from the OTAs, retain more profit, retain more control of our business, and control more of the customer experience. So I think there's a very strong argument towards being in the same ballpark as far as other cancellation policies, like match the market, which is less restrictive towards the guest, and then kind of take it from there, because ultimately you want that demand and you want to control the customer experience.
Great stuff. And Oliver, are you seeing any trends, or what would you advise?
Similar advice, matching the market. So one just weird trend where I'm not sure if this is correct, but I'm seeing this in the vast majority of markets I look into. We have a little graph on one of our market reports that goes over, hey, what percentage of listings has a certain cancellation policy in the area, and then what percentage of bookings are coming for listings with that cancellation policy. For the past year, I really haven't seen any discrepancies where I would expect to see, hey, if you have a less restrictive cancellation policy, more people, you would assume that more people book your property. But looking strictly at the data that we're collecting, that doesn't seem to be the case. So yeah, I'm not sure if having those, more open cancellations lead to more bookings. Doesn't look like it from the data, but logically that is what I would assume, and that's probably how I would set my cancellation policies for my listings here.
Great stuff. And I'm just going to look if there's any other questions really from anyone else and jump around. Do you two have any questions you'd like to ask each other? I know you asked one earlier, Jess, but are there any other questions you'd like to get in now before I see if there's any others from any attendees?
No, I mean, it's my first time meeting Oliver. I mean, it's been great sharing it with you. So
yeah. Hopefully we see each other at more of these conferences coming up soon. I know missed all of them in 2020, but 2021 should be pretty good here.
Awesome, perfect. Yeah, and got a question here from Ella, but one thing I've noticed, just like a couple of takeaways that I've got jotted down here. Jess, you mentioned it quite a few times, like match the market, and I think that's great advice. If you look at what everyone else is doing in terms of like cancellation policies, in terms of how they're managing pricings and minimums, I think that's a really good way to sort of be comparable if you've got a good product. And what we like to do is that in most ways, but then do something to stand out. make sure our listing highlights a few amenities, like Oliver said, in terms of if it's got parking in a central location, not many do. If it allows pets in a rural location, not many do. So it's almost like match with everything that you can, and then pick the 2 or 3 things that you can be different around and maximize them. And I've got like 2 or 3 nuggets that both of you have said where it's like, right, let me go and talk to someone so we can implement that, because it's worth doing. So the question we've got. Go on, Jess.
Oh no, I was just about to clarify. So we always talk about like, hey, don't copy your neighbors. Like, we want to find the equilibrium price level that the market will. So when I say match the market, it's kind of like overall, what's the most effective way? It's not necessarily set and then chasing them and chasing their pricing. We could give March 2020. I know that I've used this a couple times, but in March 2020, everyone dropped prices in major beach markets. I'll just use them as an example. And then I think demand increased faster than anybody else could have expected in the US. And so a lot of folks who followed the market and they all dropped prices at the same time, so they matched the market, they all priced out. So they sold it way too low. So there's the concept of like, follow your neighbor, price it to the efficient level, and use like data and then try to figure out where you fit relative to the market.
Yeah, so you're talking about the market as in demand and external, not necessarily your neighbour, the person next to you, or the 10 people operating in the same like suburb or area.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great clarification. So the question we've got is, from a property management point of view, when we're looking at like uncertainty in the market, what is your suggestion in areas that we have a few units, like 1 or 2, so low number, low single digits? How can we get a better understanding of market demand and prevent selling cheap once like selling in advance? So I think that's back to your point, Jess. How can we like plan ahead if you've got a couple of units, but to not drop prices or massively increase them when the market's not really showing that in data? So how can you do that when you've got like a small sample size yourself to play with?
Yeah, so I think 1 or 2 units isn't inconsequential. I mean, I don't know what those properties are worth, but they're worth a lot. And so I would think entering a market where you don't necessarily have the best intel as far as what the market would support, there's kind of a couple ways that I tend to bleed in, or we talk to customers and we tend to bleed into a market. The first is you look at market data. I mean, that's the first thing. You can see kind of where prices are for similar properties, begin to estimate, to Oliver's point, amenities and how do you sort of fit in. And then, understanding your booking lead time, like, are you in the right time of year to actually be booking? So there's that local know-how that you'll probably pick up through a pricing or data tool that will show you that sort of piece of it. And then the second is, once you're comfortable with the data and the elements around kind of like, hey, how does the market behave? There's the interaction with the market. And so set your prices and test it. And don't be afraid to change it. If you set prices and you get too many bookings in the first week, then raise it. Raise it again and again. Pricing it's a science, and revenue management is a science, and you want to tweak it in, but there's no better way to understand where your property fits in with market than letting the market interact with you and feeling it out. And then once you get that, you can start to understand like, hey, how's my marketing? How's my pricing? And then you can start to get a feel for what's happening locally. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on that, Greg, being a property manager.
Yeah, I was just going to say before I open it to Oliver, we specialize in let's say houses, 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses. So only a small proportion of our portfolio is actually in apartment blocks. And when it's in blocks, we've got 5 in one building. We can do, right, let's set 2 with a minimum of 2-week bookings at this price point with a heavy discount, but we're aiming for this type of guest. So we can say, with these 2, we're going to go really high at weekends and then fill in the weeks with cheap business bookings. And we can sort of play and test and say, we can see what works, and then we can learn quicker. To your point, it's like you make a plan, but until it goes live in the market, you don't know what's going to happen. Our biggest challenge is there's less market, or there's less data around the market with what we do. So if we go to some of the areas we're in now, we've got, I don't know, 5 houses in a town, but there's only 8 in the whole market. And when we launched, we were one of 4 or one of 3, which when you start saying what's everyone else doing and like what's the nightly rate and what's the demand, anywhere you look in terms of the research tools, to be honest, it doesn't really count for very much. And you'll launch that, you'll put it in the market, and very quickly you'll say, how good do I feel about this? Like, was it too cheap? Is it too expensive? And we've got a great example. We launched one in a very rural part of Wales, far, far west coastal area. And we went there because it's got a dockyard. So we thought all year round industry docks, but it's very near like national parks and countryside and beach walks and things. That as soon as restrictions lifted in this country, like the demand was like booked. And we were like, okay, something's wrong here. And it only takes 24 hours and half your calendar's full for you to then say something's wrong here. So then you go the other way and it's too far. And then you come back and some of it, like you say, it's science, but it's also that gut of going through the cycles. And that was sort of the questions earlier, Jess, and you gave a really great perspective from someone else where it's 12 months of revenue in 7. And he's been in it long enough for a couple of years and a couple of summers and a couple of winters to know what he thinks it's going to end on. Whereas if this is your first year or second year with a couple of units, you haven't built up that gut feeling around how you think this is going to play out. So my advice would be, launch a couple, definitely price them differently, because if you price them the same, you're not going to know what works. So always have 2 different pricing strategies if you've got 2 units, and you'll find one will outperform the other one, and then you'll say, okay, well, let's go nearer that, and then you'll end up with 2 that are slightly different again, and you'll get closer to a point where you're happy. Like my background was in marketing analytics, so I'm a data nerd when it comes to it as well, but I'm always playing and testing stuff, and I think a lot of people are like set and forget, and it's on dynamic pricing and it's cool, but it's dynamic pricing, and as Oliver mentioned, there's what's far out pricing, what's your minimum restrictions, what's your cancellation policy, what's your like your widow nights. It's like, it's not just a set and forget, there's just so many things in there. So that would be my advice. It's get a couple live, whatever you think it's going to do, it's probably not, and then just keep getting closer to where you feel happier, because you're not going to get it right on day one. But yeah, Oliver, I don't know if you've got a view on that as well, because it's a great question, Ella.
Yep. So those markets where there really aren't many listings to compare yourself against in that market data, always look at the year-over-year changes. So if, let's say, hey, this year you booked up completely for the summer, see if next year you can just raise that ADR slightly and see if people keep biting there. So more of an iterative process there. Also looking at similar markets. So if the kind of demographic of the traveler is going to be similar in your small market versus another maybe slightly bigger market or comparable small market, looking at what pacing trends they're currently seeing, and if you are falling behind those or outperforming those, really making those pricing adjustments to account for that. So yeah, it's like really looking at your historic data, which, I mean, gets tough when you had a year like 2020 here and there's new property managers constantly coming in. So
yeah, I think it's like most things, how I look at them. It's where are you the same, and are you the same on the key things that you need for it to be accepted by the market, and where can you be different on a few things that make a difference. And like some of our best properties are houses that would be terrible as family houses because they have no garden, but they've got a car park. So for a certain guest type of traveller, it's perfect, where it's easy parking. They can like sit out in like a courtyard, but for a family with kids and a dog, it's not very good. So it's knowing like where can you be different to what's in the market, and like where do you need to be the same. So I just test stuff, and if it doesn't work, you can move on. But are there any other questions from anyone? Awesome. Well, I think this is a good spot to wrap up then. I hope everyone found it enjoyable. I definitely did. And I'd like to thank, obviously, Zeevou for putting this together and hosting it. And Jesse, can you give a leave behind where people can find out more information on you? And thanks for your time.
Yeah, I mean, thank you everyone who stuck around. I mean, I love talking data. If anybody ever wants to talk data, it's just jesse@beyondpricing.com. That'll just get straight to me. No sales or anything like that. I just love talking about this stuff. So feel free to email me. It's just jesse@beyondpricing.com. Yeah, and we'll chat.
Brilliant. And Oliver, same from you. How can people keep in touch or find out more?
Yeah, same for me, Oliver at Pricelabs.co. Or if you just go to Pricelabs.co, tons of good info on there. Always happy to chat, walk you through the system, see how you're currently pricing in, see if we can do anything a little bit differently here. So, yeah, reach out.
Brilliant. No, brilliant. And thank you both for joining. And thanks for everyone else for joining as well.